Hello everyone, welcome to the Seymour Duncan online course on how to solder. If you've never soldered before or want to brush up on a few things, this is a perfect course for you. We're going to cover everything, all the basics, from the type of tools that you need, some soldering techniques, as well as some ways to practice. So this will really help build some confidence in you as you go into wanting to fix some of the electronics in your guitar, or maybe you just want to do some modifications, swapping out a pickup, change the pots out to like a push-pull, maybe the switch needs to be replaced. This is a great skill to have. And it doesn't cost too much to get into all these tools. The most expensive thing is going to be your soldering iron, but other than that, the tools are relatively inexpensive. Plus, you can even save some money from not having to take your guitar to a tech. So let's get started now with the first topic, which is we're going to cover all the tools you need, as well as just the basic tools that can get the job done. So let's get started. All right, so let's dive into some of the tools that you're going to need. First off, it's not so much a tool, but definitely essential items, which is some safety glasses. You definitely want to wear some of these if you don't have glasses like myself to protect your eyes, because solder can actually fly around as you're working, and the last thing you want is a chunk of solder to land in your eye. Very painful and definitely can ruin your day. So always be safe and get yourself some safety glasses. They're real cheap, definitely a worthwhile investment. Now let's get into the main thing, which is going to be your soldering station. And there's a lot of different solder stations out there. The one we use is rated at 85 watts. This one also allows us to adjust the temperature. And most of the time you won't need to adjust the temperature. This is more of kind of a professional level. But the main thing is you want to get a soldering station capable of, let's say, 40 watts or greater. Again, this is an 85 watt soldering iron, but a 40 watt is kind of the bare minimum. The reason why is because you want to be able to heat the iron hot enough to be able to bond the solder to, let's say, the back of a pot, because this is a big heat sink source, and you need something hot to be able to do that type of work. So like I said, look for something in that greater than 40 watts. You don't need an adjustable one. It's kind of a nice to have item on the solder station. So look out for that. The main solder that we recommend, because it's widely available, especially depending on the country you're coming from, because a full lead solder is hard to come by depending on where you're from. So we recommend the 60-40 rosin core solder. So it's 60-10-40 lead, and this is going to be the most readily available online in most electronic stores, hardware stores, that kind of thing. And this works really great. Make sure you get the rosin core, because the rosin, it works, it's like a flux, and metal tends to oxidize, and the flux helps the solder bond to the components better. So this is the type we recommend. The only downside is that you may need to have a little bit hotter iron to work with this versus a full lead solder. So just kind of keep that in mind. Most irons will, like we talked about earlier, anything that's rated over 40 watts will be fine with something like this. So this is the type that we recommend. Next thing up is a set of helping hands. These are really useful, actually, whether you're a beginner or even you've been soldering for a while, partly because it's just like the name says, it gives you an extra hand to be able to do certain things. For an example, let's say if I want to tin a wire, I can actually clip the wire to it, and I have my iron here and some solder. I can now work on that particular wire without placing it on let's say the guitar or even on the mat. That can actually cause more problems. So it's also great because you can hold a wire in place, and there's just a lot of great uses with something like this. So definitely don't be afraid to use one of these, and they're not very expensive either. You can find them relatively inexpensive online. So it's a nice investment, especially if you're new. So next up, we're going to get into some of these wire cutters here. Now, real important. So generally what you want to do is have a pair of wire cutters specifically for cutting wires. and another one specifically for cutting, let's say, your strings, because the strings are a little bit, they're stronger, they're thicker, and you don't want to use a delicate cutter on the strings because it'll damage it. So make sure you have a more robust cutter for your strings and something like this that's specific for cutting wire. This is nice because it's small, it gets into tight corners, so if you need to clip off lead wires off, let's say, your pickups, or let's say a capacitor or something like that, this works really well. Another kind of thing to have in your toolbox is a needle nose pliers. We recommend something that's kind of thin and narrow versus something that you'll sometimes see needle nose that are a little bit thicker and robust. The narrow ones are a little bit easier to get into tight spots on your, whether it's in the pod or the cavity or something like that. So this is definitely nice to have, and they're not very expensive to get. So another thing in the same vein as the needle nose pliers is some electronic tweezers. These are really handy because they can really get into the small areas of, let's say, the guitar cavity, or if you need to work with some of these components here, especially the terminals, it's really kind of a nice tool to have, and it's not cumbersome, and it can do a lot of the same things as the needle nose pliers, but just in finer areas. So these things are relatively inexpensive, so definitely check out some of those. Now let's check out this solder sucker here, which is a nice to have item. It's not essential, but if you're new, it may be good to have, because a lot of times people that are new to soldering will put too much solder on the component, so you may need to remove it and start again. This could be a helpful tool. It's really easy to use. You basically depress this button here, and this button will release it, and basically what you're going to do is heat it up, and then you're going to release that, and it sucks all that solder right into the chamber, and then once you push down, it actually will release the excess solder there. So they're relatively inexpensive, so it's kind of a nice thing to have as well. Next up is something that does more or less the same type of job, which is remove solder, which is a solder braid. Another real inexpensive item to have. And the way this works is, instead of sucking the solder out like this guy, this one you would actually lay on top of the solder and heat it up, and the solder will be drawn to this copper braid. And this works better on more like small terminals and kind of like finer work, and these come in different thicknesses. But again, especially if you're new, it could be a nice thing to have, because you may accidentally put too much solder on the components, and it's a great way to kind of remove and start again.